This video is to clarify some things that I think don't need to be left up to the imagination because the issues keep coming up of what Christians should do, how they should behave, who they should associate with, and whether they should have barking dogs in the background. So anyway, I've got some verses up here that I think I want to just read through the verses first and then get to why I'm showing these verses. Okay. And so you can see we got up here, this is a paragraph out of 1 Corinthians 9, verses 19 through 23. And it says, this is Paul speaking, he says, by being free of all obligation, I become the slave of all, so as to gain all the more. To the Judeans, I become a Judean in order to win them over. To those under the law, I become under the law, though I myself am not under it, in order to win them over. To those without the law, I become as without the law. Not that I am free from God's law, since I am the legal property of the anointed, in order to win them over. To the weak, I became weak to win them over. To everyone, I became what I needed to become so that some could be saved. I did it all so I could be a joint partner of the gospel. What's he saying there? He's saying that he would bend to try to relate to whoever he's trying to reach. And he made a point, just as a kind of a side note, not really my topic, but that even though he was not under law, he would relate to people who were from their perspective. That is to say, getting into their shoes. He was certainly understanding that kind of a background because he was a Pharisee. But it's interesting that he says, I am not under the law. And yet he says, I'm under God's law. So he's talking clearly about the Jewish law. He's not talking about the traditions. And he's saying, I'm not under that, but I am under God's law. So we can't just say that all the laws of Moses are God's law. Even though they are God's laws, they're not the entirety of God's laws or have to apply everywhere to every people every time. But that's a side point, like I said. The thing is that Paul is saying that he will bend and try to relate to people. And I don't have it up here, but there's an account in Acts where he goes to the Greeks in Athens and meets with them on Mars Hill and relates to them in the fact that they had so many shrines to so many gods. And he says, I saw one to the unknown God. Let me tell you about him. And that was his hook to not fool anybody, but to relate to them. And he even quoted some of their own poets. So there's a length to which he would go, not saying you should worship all these gods, not saying you're okay where you are, but saying, I see something that I can relate to you to tell you what the truth is. And that's an approach we should all take, but some people don't read the whole scripture and get the balance that I'm always talking about. So let me go on, like I said, and read some more of these. You might wonder what they all have in common, but again, from the title, it's reasons I make choices I make as far as who I associate with. Okay, the next one is from James 4:4. It says, you unfaithful spouses, don't you realize that to be friends with the world is to be enemies of God? Whoever wants to be a friend of the world is considered an enemy of God. Well, that's pretty clear. Let me go on to 2 Timothy 3:5-8. It says, Paul is writing to Timothy talking about certain people who would come in to infiltrate, and I've done a video on that, but he says they will have the appearance of devoutness, but renounce its power. Turn away from such people. They are the kind who worm their way into people's homes and make prisoners of war out of those who will follow anyone, that is to say gullible people, because they're loaded down with many failures, are led around by all kinds of desires. So they keep on learning, they're never able to understand the truth. Just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses, so also these people oppose the truth. And that's the thing I want to key on in that passage is opposition and how to deal with it. Their minds are ruined and they are disqualified as far as the faith is concerned, but they will never make any progress, and their senselessness will be as obvious as it was for those two. So there are people who are goners as far as the faith is concerned, and we're not supposed to just keep, as Jesus put it, throwing pearls to swine, giving what is depraved, what is sacred to depraved people. And now let's go on to let's see what 2 Timothy 3:5a is what I just wrote. So this is 2 John 1:10, 1:8-10. or actually I have 11 on there. Watch yourselves so as you don't destroy what we worked for, but get your full pay. Anyone who assumes leadership but does not remain in the teaching of the anointed does not have God. But anyone who remains in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take them into your home. Don't even greet them, for the one greeting them participates in their evil work. That's a big deal. Okay, you see what Scripture is teaching here. Yeah, and I believe I had this. I don't know which verse I told you that was, but this is 2 John 1:10, 1:8 through 11. Actually, 1:10 is the main thing I wanted to key on. So again, if anyone does not bring that teaching, don't take them into your home. Don't even greet them. Don't hang out with them. Now let's go on to 2 Corinthians 6:14 is what I want to key on in this passage. And reading a little bit before and after, do not allow yourselves to be harnessed together or yoked together with unbelievers. For what do justice and lawlessness have in common? What partnership can there be between light and darkness? Especially to what agreement can the anointed and Belial come? That's one of the names of Satan. What connection is there between a believer and an unbeliever? And what could join the temple of God with that of idols? For we are the temple of the living God, the living temple of God, just as he said, I will take up residence with them and walk among them. I will be their God and they'll be my people. Therefore, come out from among them and be separate, says the master, and touch nothing unclean, and I will accept you. I will be a father to you, and you will be sons and daughters to me, says the Almighty Master. Well, why would Paul quote this? This is an Old Testament quote, and he's applying it as a principle that God says to be separate. As far as not partnering, he didn't, in the Old Testament, the Israelites were not supposed to make alliances with certain nations. And Paul is using that as an analogy to say, okay, as Christians, there are certain alliances we should not make, okay, because of these principles that he's quoting from the Old Testament. Now let's go on to the next one. I believe this is Luke 9:26 is the main verse here. Jesus is talking. He says to them all, if anyone decides to follow me, they must renounce themselves and pick up their cross each day and follow me. Those who decide to save themselves will lose themselves, but those who lose themselves on my account will save themselves. What good is it for people to gain the whole world but destroy or forfeit themselves or their lives or their souls, depending on how you interpret the Greek word? For whoever is ashamed of me and what I say, that is someone of whom the human or the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in his majesty and in the majesty of the Father and the holy messengers or angels. And that's the key there, is being ashamed of him, which is, I'm going to be talking about two different groups of people, believers and unbelievers, when it comes to who I will associate with. And this is one for believers who claim to be following Jesus and seem to be ashamed of him. Okay, they put him in the back seat and tell him to be quiet while they do certain things or associate with certain people. Now we have 1 Corinthians 12, and I'm going to key on verse 26 here. Paul is using another analogy of the human body, and he's saying that how we as Christians are supposed to relate to each other. He says, rather, those parts of the body that seem weaker are more necessary. Those parts we consider nothing, we treat with more respect. We cover private parts and give them the most utmost respect and care, while our respectable parts have no such need. So God assembled the body and gave the most vulnerable parts the greatest honor. This is so the body will not be divided, but will have each part caring for all the other parts. This is what I'm keying on here. So whatever one part experiences, so do all the other parts. If one part is honored, all the other parts celebrate together with it. So you are the body of the anointed, you are its individual parts. In another section, he says, if one part suffers, the other parts suffer with it. And that's the way the Christian body is supposed to behave, where you're supposed to be concerned about your brothers and sisters in Christ, not to join with unbelievers in bashing them. So those are the scriptures. Like I said, I have those listed in the description here. And so now I'm going to just get to the point here of what this has to do with my personal convictions. And it's just an explanation. I've done this before, but doesn't hurt to do it again. Explanation of why I choose not to go certain places or associate with certain people. Okay, so I have really simple rules. And they're really what I consider the lowest level, the lowest bar. Okay, so these are rules for me. I'm not trying to enforce them on other people, other believers even. But if anyone wonders why I choose to associate or not with certain people or in certain places, I hope that this will help answer any questions. So, and in the meantime, though, let me put this back to the first verse, just to tie that up. So, the people with whom I would refuse to associate are hostile non-Christians, that is to say, anti-Christians, or treasonous Christians, treasonous against God, and anyone who has slandered me or been abusive in some way. You just can't be around people who are treating you like that. I mean, that's just common sense. But that's pretty much it. Those are my rules. Okay, those are my base principles that I won't go beyond when I decide who I'm going to hang out with and where. Okay, it's not a high bar that's set at all for myself, but it's a firm bar nonetheless. So let me flesh this out a little bit, give some more detail. Non-Christians who display open hostility. It's one thing to harbor a dislike, and that's fine. But if you are openly hostile to the Bible, to Jesus, to Christians, you're declaring yourself an enemy of God. And remember those scriptures we just read. And understand that there's a vast difference between merely disagreeing and being openly hostile. Professing Christians, on the other hand, who support and affirm those hostile people, those unbelievers, or who wallow in sin, or who are ashamed of Jesus, remember that verse, or ashamed of the Bible, or who, worst of all, side with unbelievers against believers, they're committing treason against God. Okay, unbelievers can't commit treason because they never belong to him. They're on the other side by definition. But those who claim to be on God's side and do these things are committing treason against him. And like I said, that last one especially, if you are professing to be a Christian and you side with unbelievers against a Christian you don't happen to like publicly, especially, then you are committing treason against God. Okay, and I like I said, I read the scriptures to back up the things I'm saying, but again, the emphasis here on what my personal convictions are, not necessarily what all Christians' convictions are. So how do I decide what it means to associate? Because that's an important term to define too. The question I ask myself is whether an alliance of some sort might require me to compromise my convictions or to keep quiet about them while other people are allowed to express their convictions. Okay, so Jesus said that he'd be ashamed of anyone who is ashamed of him. We read that just a bit ago. So while it's always in order to be tactful and sensitive to people, and there's no reason to go around just like a bull in a china shop, on the other hand, it's never right to be a coward. You know, as a Christian, you represent Jesus. We are his ambassadors, as Paul said in another passage to one of the Corinthians letters. We are his ambassadors. We represent him, and we should not be ashamed of that representation. So we can't be cowards on one extreme, and we can't be, rude and insensitive on the other extreme. We can be cordial to even, some pretty nasty people. We can be superficially cordial and try to get along on the surface and try not to make waves if we don't have to. But as the Bible says in another passage that I didn't have up here on the screen, we are the aroma of Christ. We're supposed to represent him. Salt and light is the same idea. Paul used aroma because to some people we are the fragrance of life, and other people we are the stench of death. That's the aroma of God. That's how it affects people. And so we can't, as I said, be on either of those extremes, either needlessly offensive or cowardly. So people also expect, Christians to respect other beliefs. They're always going on. You have to allow other people to have their beliefs too. And I agree, but we deserve the same respect in return. See, I'm not condemning anybody to hell by declining to partner with them. And I'm not trying to be holier than thou. Would they accept such restrictions against them for their personal convictions? For example, if I reject astrotheology, should an astrotheologist be allowed to call me names or question my intelligence or judge whether I'm a good or a bad Christian or accuse me of being afraid of other views just because they don't like them? They wish that I wouldn't express my views as a Christian. That's not fair. Or put another way, would it be okay for me to call someone like a bad Hindu and accuse them of conceit if they politely decline to work with me because of their personal convictions? So it can be painful or costly or whatever to stand on your convictions, but other people are allowed to stand on theirs, and they expect to be tolerated, and they're not ashamed to express their beliefs, religious or otherwise. So why should Christians be? It isn't fair to have a double standard. Now, a lot of people, Christians and non-Christians alike, believe that unity or peace is a higher principle than standing on convictions, especially if you're a Christian. They think you should just toss yours aside while they keep theirs. But keep in mind that this idea of peace at any price, peace is the most important thing. That is the Hegelian dialectic. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, or problem, reaction, solution. There are different ways to express it. But what's going on there is when you say peace at any price, you're saying both sides must compromise. And as I said, all too often, it's just the Christian side that's expected to compromise so that a third way can be achieved. That's what peace at any price is. It's the Hegelian dialectic. Now, I've done a lot of bending and a lot of listening to people with very different values than my own that I don't like or accept. So it's not like I'm asking for something I don't practice, but even I have points past which I cannot bend. There's certain lines, as low as they are, as low as the bar is, that I won't go beyond. Not even for the sake of peace or a common goal, no matter how lofty the goal is. But what about if you're invited to a venue or join a group? Like if I were invited to one of those, something like that I don't have a problem with what the group is doing, but that group also invites those in some kind of leadership capacity or whatever who are hostile to the faith or who are treasonous against it. They undermine it. They claim to be Christians, but do counter-Christian things or approve of people who are hostile to the faith. So it's kind of a little bit of a secondary level of this, I guess you could say. So what about, for example, if I'm invited onto a YouTube panel that includes individuals who cross that little low bar that I've set? I try to err on the side of caution because if there's any chance that a reasonable person, not an extremist or paranoid person, but a reasonable person might consider my presence there as condoning or ignoring attacks on the faith, I wouldn't be there. That's where my line is, if I'm not sure, then it's better to err on the side of caution. But what about what I'd call maybe a second generation issue, meaning friends of friends? Okay. I can't extend my little low bar rules that far, or I wouldn't have anyone to associate with. But on the other hand, if I'm to be held guilty by association on that account, then so must my critics be held to account for any and all of their friends and acquaintances. And as I've said many times in the past, I'll compare my choice of friends with theirs anytime. So there's if the people who want to hold me to such a high standard that I can't even be friends of friends of friends of somebody, that's hostile to the faith, then I'm going to hold them to the same standard. That's only fair. Now, there are conferences or meetups, and I'm not going to name people or conferences, but you can probably figure it out, that are led by Christians or other people who are not, who are just, who are generally pleasant people, and they promote unity and peace. But some of the speakers, some of the leaders have been in the habit in the past of expressing hostility against the Bible and Jesus. Okay, there are people who use the term zombie Jesus. There are people who say the Jesuits wrote the Bible was patently false, and they spread other falsehoods about the Bible being plagiarized. Why the obsession with the Bible? Only the Bible, always the Bible, and Christians and so forth. Okay, there are people. What if there are people like that invited to the conference? Okay, my presence at such meetings would violate my convictions because I'd be supporting enemies of God. And they declared themselves to be enemies. I did not declare this for them. They openly would agree that they are enemies of the God of the Bible and anybody who is loyal to the God of the Bible or the Bible and, Christians in general, unless they're the kind of Christians who don't stand on any convictions. They like those. But I couldn't go to those. Even though there's nice people there and people I generally don't have a problem with, there's going to be some there who I do have a problem with because of their hostility and bias, and I can't go. Now, some of those people, the hostile ones, will excuse their hostility by calling it science or truth, or being awake, but it's really just bias and prejudice. I mean, they like to redefine the terms so that, because it's not the God of the Bible, somehow it's not religion. And that's not true either. I have to push the channel. The truth is stranger than fiction, especially the ethereal video that exposes what little difference there is between astrophysics and quantum physics and that sort of realm and ancient pagan, anti-God, anti-Bible religions, the Babylonian religions. I've done a video on Babylon before last year. That's where those ideas come from. And they insist, the scientists, the atheists and evolutionists insist that this is pure science, but it's really Babylonian religion. And that's where they get a lot of these ideas. It's uncanny, the parallels. And so by just trying to say that what they believe, such as astrotheology, is not a religion, that's just laughable, because theology is the study of God. I don't care how they try to excuse it. It's their religious belief. And so they can't claim, well, we're allowed to say these things about Mount Meru or whatever it is, and because it's science. No, it isn't. It's religion, because even science is religion. Okay? So they just can't use that as an excuse. So all I'm asking for is the same standard. If we're expected to hold our tongues as Christians on issues that are not directly related to the purpose of these meetings or conferences, it's a different topic. I would not insist upon making it a religious topic, but other people do by bringing in their astrotheology and so forth. So if Christians have to hold their tongues, then so do those others on their religious beliefs. And they are religious. If Christians have to be quarantined, set in their own little section so they don't offend anybody, what about Christians having to be offended listening to some astrotheologist? I'm just using that as a convenient example. So if we have to be quarantined, then so do they. And their beliefs are no more scientific than ours. So I could not in good conscience support Christians who don't see a problem with befriending those people who have attacked our faith, and mocked Jesus and the Bible and spread lies about the Bible and Christianity. So then if some people use the excuse that by partnering with anti-Christians, we might bring them the gospel, I would remind them that those people are anti-Christians precisely because they've already heard it. So that's a lame excuse. And it isn't as though the gospel can't be heard elsewhere. It would be better to invite those anti-Christians to a private meeting to discuss the faith and bring them the gospel some other private way, and not publicly support them under the guise, the premise, the excuse that you're trying to bring the gospel to places. No, you're not. You're just not. They are already anti-Christian because they've heard it. And if the excuse is that the public anti-Christian venue gives Christians access to a wider audience, what good is that if you're not allowed to speak, if you're not allowed to share your faith? They're just not thinking these things through, or not being entirely honest with themselves, I think, sometimes. I don't know what their motive is for winking at these things. But what it all boils down to, for me especially, is to honor God and my fellow believers more than any other supposed greater good, and not to allow myself to be somebody's punching bag. Anybody, people who will just troll you and abuse you all the time, you can't be around those people. I mean, that's how low the bar is set. And I don't force anybody to listen to me. I don't hound them on their channels. I don't, send them email and messages and say, I've got to tell you the truth. I remember one channel I went on once, just very briefly. I was invited because I kept saying, hey, you're misrepresenting what I believe. So I got on panel, and the first thing they did is shout me down and then say, no, wait a minute, I have to tell you what's wrong with you. That's not fairness at all. And I'm just not putting up with that. That's making yourself a punching bag. So I don't treat people like that. They treat me like that, but I'm not going to stick around if they do. Okay, so I don't know if that helps to explain where I'm coming from, but there are certain principles I go by and stick to that aren't very demanding that I won't cross, no matter what the greater good might have been. Okay, I don't know if that helps at all, but there you go. Let's take a look at the chat. Yeah, I can't speak to any personal issues anybody's having, and I go out of my way not to open old wounds or anything like that. But feel free to message me. I don't know. I keep seeing a message in Creator Studio on YouTube that the private messaging system will end shortly. I think by July, which is only a couple days away. But you can always leave a comment under video or something like that, and we'll find a way to get in touch by email or something. But yeah, there's prices to pay, and you either have convictions or you don't. I mean, it's important to have them if you're going to be a Christian. And and we all know that too well. The passage on the screen sounds like a Jesuit memo. I'm not sure which passage that was. Oh, and justifies the means. Yeah. They will stop at nothing. They're not just the Jesuits either. Masons or whoever it is will use the ultimate goal as an excuse for any and every crime that violates all their stated principles. That's just how people are. Some of these organizations. Let's see. Limits of or Alliance of something. Alliance of Science. I'm not sure what you mean there, but science can be religion, even on the level of it being somebody's obsession or something that they just can't get enough of, that they're, that's an obsession, I guess, but you know what I mean by somebody treating something as their religion, but also in the fact that it, like I said, quantum physics, and if you watch Ethereal at Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, it details the parallels, and other people have done the same, where these quantum ideas that are supposedly science are really just ancient New Age, oxymoron name, but Babylonian, Hindu, a mixed match of a whole bunch of different things, but they're all, as I've said before, the religion called ABC, anything but Christianity. And that's what science passes itself off as. I mean, it passes itself off as science, all those religious views. And so it is a religion in the true sense of the word also. Let's see. Yeah, pastor says there are so many academic or professional liars, and that's true. They admitted such. I forget where I was the other day that showed a page from a college physics professor admitting that they brainwash as a matter of course. And but there's a lot of pastors who do the same thing. I'm not gonna. I don't even like that title. It's a spiritual gift, not a title, and I think that's been misused over the years too. Let's see. Hey, Paul on the plane. Good to see you. I suppose I should shout people out. Outer Passion, Timaeus, Truth Freeze, Paul on the plane, Victoria, Timaeus, I think I named you. I don't hope I didn't skip anybody. John Love Jesus, Mr. Rich Bob. Oh, thanks for the compliment on the sun video. I didn't even, that was a really spur of the moment thing. It was just like, I saw this video and I said, wait a minute, I got to spread this around because the sun isn't moving on its surface. I mean, like I said on that video, I can understand the kind of a two-tone, like a white noise pattern on the sun as far as brights and darks, not counting the sunspots. And yet those things, when they show you, mainstream science videos, they're just like a seething cauldron of this fireball, but I saw nothing of the sort in that amateur video. Nothing was moving. And that projection off the one limb is just like I said, it looks like cotton candy or something. It's not plasma arcing. It didn't look even like a tornado. It wasn't spinning. It wasn't moving. It was an amazing thing to see. But let's see. Yeah, defending non-believers. I mean, there are times just as a human being, you defend somebody who's being attacked wrongly, but as Christians, it's a terrible thing. Like I said, the worst thing I think a Christian can do is attack another Christian and side in the process of attacking, siding with an unbeliever. You know, I've seen that so many times where Christians would rather lock arms with rank atheists, anti-theists, whatever, just to gang up on a fellow believer because they don't like some minor point of theology of theirs. It's just, that's a high treason, if you ask me. Let's see. Liberals today are with science. Yeah, well, it's their God. And all that goes with big pharma and all that sort of thing. Yeah, that passage where Paul says he's not under the law. Let me see if I can bring that one back up again. Yeah, oh, it's right there. Okay, I've got that's the first one I started with. And he says point blank right there, I am not under the law. That's 920. Yeah. Yep, that's a good one to use in other topics. Go to college, university, and pay for high. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say into all college. I would say more liberal arts, or if you get into the theoretical sciences, that's certainly true. Practical sciences, engineering, those things work, you know, and so we can't broad brush too much. Mark is here, Libra 61 star. John loves Jesus, I think I mentioned. Let's see. Good camera. A Boogeyman channel wants folks to share good Skywatch stuff for new website. Okay, Boogeyman. All right, I'll see if I can find that sometime. All right, yeah, I've got a lot of still shots too that I generally don't put in videos because what's the point? But I did have a link on, I think it's my first Jupiter, Saturn, Moon video. One of those, I put a link in the comments to a still shot I made, actually a stacked image of two of my own shots of the moon, and it came out pretty nice. So you might want to check that out. Vaxxed is a good film. Let's see. Yeah, I didn't learn that real early either, although I did in the later years for especially my younger son, that I went to the state government website and got exemption forms. And so, vaccines. See, autism has risen. Yeah, there's a definite correlation between the two, but I'm not really into that right now today. Yep, pretty much. I mean, what could be better for the powers that be than to have, just like in the Aldous Huxley novel, I think it was Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, where they engineered everyone to be a certain type of worker, whatever they needed. You know, they would engineer people so that they would be just intelligent enough to do their slave work, and that's all, and not rebel and not think about philosophy or anything like that. So, all right. Well, I don't know, like I said, whether it helped at all to explain where I'm coming from, why I choose what I do for not being in certain places or associating with certain people. I try my best to get along, but there are certain things that I, as a Christian, would violate my conscience if I hung around with those people or went to those places. So that's mostly what this is about. And I don't have anything else to say. So, yep. Try and support decent channels. Try not to support channels, especially as Christians, that spew out falsehoods, or the people on the panel don't seem to know what they're talking about and they cause confusion, or they promote people who are teaching open heresy. Try not to support those channels. That's all I can recommend. Advise, not control, not boss. Let's see. Okay, I'm waiting for something in the chat here. And I can't wait too long because I have to do something. But best biblical way to draw the line, as far as what I've been talking about, you mean? Other than the verses I've had up, like I said at the very beginning, you might have missed that. What I said basically is that my line that I won't cross is people who are hostile to the faith, or Christians who betray the faith in some way, or people who are abusive. Between known wolves and suspects and erroneous folks, I mean, there's always going to be judgment calls to make, but put the scriptures in, your head that have to do with this, such as the one that I have listed in the description of if it's doing damage to the faith, if it's causing confusion, if they don't practice what they preach, even if they preach the truth, or if their behavior is such that it's bringing disrepute upon the faith. If you look at 1 Corinthians 5, the people of Corinth were very proud of the sin they were permitting, and they were being very progressive and kumbaya and all that. But, their doctrine wasn't the problem. It was their behavior, their lack of balance between love and holiness. That's all I could offer off the top of my head for guidelines. Especially if you read the letters of Paul, they're very practical, dealing with the thorny issues that were facing Christians then, just like they face today. And let's say you've got an example here, calling a lot of people heretics. Well, some people's idea of a heretic, which comes from the Greek word meaning other or different teaching. We have to use as our standard. I have a video called The Standard, where you use the Bible to judge who is a heretic. And people have different interpretations, but as Christians, we have to know what our core values are that define us as Christians. And if we agree on that, then it's all a matter of internal discipline, and we should be handling these things internally. But it's not like it used to be, as far as, isolated churches in certain areas and decent people who knew the scriptures and could, were respected, and a group of elders that would try to clarify things. And still, people have the freedom to defy them if they want. But on the other hand, groups of Christians have also the freedom to expel them from fellowship. I just think, you'd have to take it on a case by case, but I think if you overuse the term heretic to mean anybody who disagrees for any reason, I got a problem with that. Santos Bonacci is mentioned in the chat. He is an astrotheologist. He is very anti-Bible, anti-Christian. He thinks he knows the scriptures better than we do, and that Christians can't understand their own Bible, but he can. Very arrogant, very, it's not, I want to say exactly Hindu, but it's got some Hindu in it, as far as it's kind of a buffet approach. It's the hyper allegorical approach, and he thinks anybody who doesn't agree with him is an idiot. I don't have the link handy right now, but there is a website that was, the article was 5 years ago, by someone who is not a Christian, who agrees with a lot of the things that Santos agrees with, but called him out as a fraud. Now, I'm not saying one way or another. I'm just saying this is what unbelievers thought of him 5 years ago, that he was still doing the whiteboard even then, doing things on a whiteboard that impress people, and he seems very persuasive. But if we remember Proverbs 18:17, it says the first person to speak always seems right until they're cross-examined. Well, nobody gets to cross-examine him on any venue where he's practically worshipped as a guru. So I don't bother. I don't go around attacking what he believes. I just present what I believe and why there's people like that I won't associate with, or people who promote him I won't associate with because he's so hostile. That's just one of those things that I, as a good example of how I would apply my low bar on that, who I would associate with or support. And it's just painful to watch a lot of times that people, not, him necessarily, but professing Christians who will let, some weeks ago, there was somebody who was just all chummy with someone who was a known cult leader representing that cult that had been in legal trouble in the UK and all that. And there was someone in chat trying to warn them, but they took no heed. They don't listen to anybody at that channel. They just go blindly on, and everybody's their brother. And it's just, that's subversion. But like I said, try to not support channels like that. That's all I can recommend right now. Yeah. So looking at the chat some more, sorry. Yeah, study the word for yourself. That's the only thing you can do. And try to get opinions of people who walk the walk and seem to have spent time studying the scriptures, however many of those people you can find. And there's commentaries, just consult them all. I mean, they're all going to, they're all human. We're all human. But try to get as many opinions as possible on a passage if you're just, and then in the end, you have to decide for yourself. But try, study. Yeah, heretic, it has a specific meaning in more formal churches, that anything that is not in agreement with their decrees, their personal opinions as a group, their agreed upon opinions, Holy Spirit, they don't care about. It's what they as a group, their committee thinks. And so anybody who doesn't agree is a heretic and they're thrown out and so forth. So as far as what the gospel is, I suppose I should always clarify that is, the Bible makes it very clear that the gospel is that Jesus died for our sins and was buried and rose again. That is the gospel. If we believe that for the purpose of being reconciled to God, then we belong to Jesus and we're saved and we're Christians, as far as the Bible defines the term, because it is the message of reconciliation. It's an offer of adoption as God's children. And you accept this offer, and it's a gift. You cannot earn it by your good deeds. It's a gift that you accept because you trust Jesus that rose from the dead, that Jesus, literally, not an allegory. If you're down with that, then, you're a Christian as far as the Bible defines it. Now, there are certain things that are expected of a person who is grateful for being adopted, and, read the Bible to find out what those things are. But, that's what it is. I mean, there's a lot of baggage attached to all these things, but that's why I harp so much on the Bible, because it's not going to change with every change in society or every new idea that comes along. You just keep studying it and studying it and studying it and hang around with people who do the same and try to, if you hear different opinions, you're going to you have to study yourself and figure it out, and ask people that you trust. But there's no point in studying the Bible until you are a Christian, unless you just think of it as another historical document. But what I won't do is accept interpretations of the Bible by astrotheologists and so forth, by non-Christians who are going to tell me that they don't think I'm doing it right. They're just way out of line doing that. I mean, I don't do that to Hindus or Muslims and tell them, look, your book says such and such, and you're not doing it right. That would be arrogant and antagonistic and conceited. And I don't do that. So I won't let them do that to me. Yep. And Vic quoted in John 14:6, I think it is, Jesus is the way, truth, and life. No one comes to the Father but through him. I am trying to memorize that in Greek. That's the only other passage I have memorized in Greek is John 1:1-5. I have a video on spirit, soul, body. You might not have seen that, Truth Freeze, but look in my channel list. Within the last month, I think it was, that I did one on a whole bunch of word pairs and spirit, soul, body, and so forth, mind. I did breakdown on that, so you might want to check that out. I also have a whole prophecy playlist, and I have a document. Let me see if I can get that real quick. It is my one-stop shopping, I call it, for Bible prophecy. And let me just go and get that real quick. Get the link. Hopefully I can post it. If I can't, oh well, you'll just have to go to my website. There it goes. That's my prophecy rundown. It uses, I called it Remaining Bible Prophecies Integrated, because it isn't just Revelation, isn't just Daniel, but it's a whole bunch of things. And Reyes, or however you pronounce your name, I only know how to write it. I don't know how to say it. Anderzace. Sorry. Yep, share the gospel. Stick to the basics. The bar is pretty low in these very philosophical and noisy times, I would call it, because there's so many people speaking so many different crazy ideas that it's like, well, how do there's so much noise. How do you pick out the signal? Well, it's in the Bible, and I can only offer the studies I've done on my channel and my website, which if you go to that link, you can click around and find other things that I've done there too, that you can do searches and alphabetical lists and so forth. It's not a Google search, but it'll get you somewhere. Anyway, I think that's all I have. And again, try to, be a Berean, as the Bible says, and check the scriptures for yourself against anything anybody might claim. Try to stay away from people who confuse you and people who will promote anyone and anything on their panel and call them brothers and sisters, no matter what they teach, because peace at any price, which is, as I said, is the Hegelian dialectic. That is subversion. And stay away from people who claim to be Christians who either wallow in sin or who will team up with unbelievers against other Christians. That's just wrong. So anyway, I got some other things to do. So thanks for coming, and we'll see y'all later.